Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 18th and tonight's movie is Deep Red. This is a horror film directed by Dario Argento, who also directed the original Suspiria. I reviewed that last year and I thought it was decent. The best part about Suspiria was its aesthetics, its use of color, and that doesn't seem to be the case with Deep Red. And again, this might just be trailers not really showcasing the tone of the movie properly, but the trailer I saw, it seemed to want to go back and forth between something really artistic and a sort of campy, gory slasher movie. I have no idea if this is supernatural in nature or completely in reality. There's just a killer on the loose, and something about him murdering a psychic, so maybe there is something supernatural, I don't know. I'm gonna go watch it. I didn't realize that watching Deep Red was going to be such a complicated thing. I'm giving Deep Red a 6 out of 10, and I'll get into why later, but first I just want to talk about the different versions that this movie has. The original version of this movie is 2 hours and 6 or 7 minutes. But when it was released in America, it was edited down to 104 minutes. There have been director's cuts and different cuts released, but for some reason, none of them have the scenes that were cut out in English, even though the people were speaking English on set. Just like Suspiria, Deep Red was filmed without sound and it was just dubbed later in both Italian and English. But apparently, only the Italian version kept all the footage, which led to the mostly English version that I watched having long parts of the movie in Italian with no subtitles. Apparently, the scenes that were still in Italian, they didn't really add that much to the movie, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't seeing an abridged cut. Anyway, Deep Red. I think I would describe Deep Red as if you had a B movie that somehow had a really, really big studio budget. The movie can be over the top and silly, but usually it's in a fun way. And just like Suspiria, this is a beautiful looking movie. Obviously, it's not nearly as stylistic, but Dario Argento really knows how to get good shots. The cinematography was also interesting. It was a lot like Pulse, where they did a lot of voyeuristic type of things, except instead of making you feel like an outsider watching it, there's a lot of POV shots from the killer. In fact, scenes with the killer are almost exclusively done in POV, so that means a lot of the times when you see a shot of just looking at the characters from the distance, it's hard to tell whether it's just a normal shot or a point of view of the killer watching them. So while there are a lot of good things I can say about Deep Red, the big problem with it is the pacing. Maybe the original cut was just too padded. But you know what? Even taking into consideration the stuff that was brought over to the English version, I think that they could have cut a lot out of this movie. For example, there's a romance between the two of the main characters that I thought was entirely pointless. It was pretty much cut out of the English version from what I understand. But honestly, I think it would have been better if it would cut out and it just seems that they were friends because they have no chemistry with each other. There were also quite a few scenes of people going from point A to point B that I don't think contributed to the atmosphere at all. I think that even with the 104-minute version, they could have knocked off another 15 minutes or so. To sum up, I would say that Deep Red is a fun, if silly movie when it's not dragging along. And now I want to go into some spoilers. One great example of a very pointless scene is the main character, the clues lead him to this abandoned house. And after a whole day of exploring it, he realizes that the picture that led him to that house has a window where there isn't a window anymore. So he goes back in the middle of the night, leaving only a note, and he finds a pickaxe, luckily, and tries to break down the wall. Not from the inside, but by climbing on the outside. He does manage to break through and look in a little bit, but he also almost falls to his death. And then there's a 2-minute sequence of him slowly climbing down, and then in the next scene, he breaks in from the inside anyway. It's stuff like this that makes me think that only cutting 20 minutes out of this movie was being a little too lenient. There's also the scene of the two supposed romantic interests arguing about the differences between men and women, and then they arm wrestle while trying to firmly identify what the rules of their arm wrestling be and how to not cheat. And that goes on forever too. And that was a scene that they actually kept in the English release. There were plenty of other conversations that were still in Italian, so I can't even imagine how pointless those conversations were. Anyway, the first half of the movie is very slow, but it does start to pick up eventually. This killer has a few calling cards, a specific outfit, this tape recording of this little kid's song. And for the most part, the movie keeps its cards close to its chest when it comes to any information about what this killer actually looks like, except for this one scene at the very beginning of the movie where you see a blurry image of them in a mirror. But anyway, this killer doesn't really have an MO when it comes to how they kill people. All the deaths that we saw were very different from each other. And in one of them, they just had to get really lucky because the lady that they were killing lived in a house where the hot water from the tap is hot enough to kill somebody. That had to have been what did them in. They didn't drown. By the way, that did result in a moment that I thought was kind of clever, I guess, from one perspective, but also a little stupid in another perspective. As she was dying, she apparently had an epiphany about the killer's identity and tried to write a message on the wall, which was like a mirrored wall, in the steam from the boiling hot water that they have coming from the tap for some reason. Except, whoops, once the air clears, the mist and fog goes away from the windows and their message disappears, and the body is just left pointing at the wall. But once the cleaning lady comes and tries to clean up the blood, because I guess this crime scene doesn't matter, and is trying to clean it up with the boiling hot tap water, the windows and the wall of mirrors starts to fog up, and the character that was there realizes that that might have been what the person was doing before they died, and they found the message coming back up. Either way, I think it would have been a lot easier and made more sense to just write the name in her blood. Oh, and by the way, the character who came to this conclusion and figured this out, they died like a few scenes later before they could seemingly tell anyone about it, so that didn't seem to have that much of a point to it. I will say that when the movie isn't being silly, there are a lot of really good moments of action and horror in it. Not to mention, it is beautifully shot. It's these type of things that make me consider this to be sort of like a B movie with a big studio budget, because you can enjoy it the most when you're not really thinking about it that hard. Because there is still a lot to enjoy in Deep Red. It has a really interesting score, it looks great, has some good practical effects, and a pretty decent aha moment twist ending. Deep Red is a mixed bag, but I think ultimately it came out on top, but just barely. I definitely thought Suspiria was better and would recommend that over this, though. Alright, thank you for listening, I'll see you tomorrow.